Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this edition of Spiritual Warfare. Tonight, I would like to talk to you about a disturbing event that happened to me a few weeks ago. I went to see the movie Kingsman Secret Service starring Colin Firth. And not to get into a big critique of the movie, but it is a spy adventure thriller, and it's been doing great at the box office. And I would agree with that because I myself was very entertained by the movie. I thought it was well acted. I thought it was well produced. And considering the fact that it's a spy movie with a lot of action and fight sequences and violence, it really wasn't that bloody in the beginning. So I would have even recommended it until it got to the last 45 or so minutes of the movie. A very disturbing thing happened. Colin Firth, as a secret agent, was sent to this church in Kentucky. The majority of this movie was filmed in Europe, but he was sent to this church in Kentucky in the U.S. to investigate this group of people at a church who were considered a hate group. And they were on the watch list as terrorists. And when Colin got to this little church somewhere nested in the hills of Kentucky, he walks into the church, and there is a minister who's preaching a message against homosexuality. He calls it sodomy. He's preaching a message against abortion, and he's basically preaching a fundamental list of biblical message that is actually very biblical for any Bible-believing Christian today. And Colin Firth's character was, to make a long story short, the enemy, the villain in the movie was played by Samuel L. Jackson, and he had this mind control program that he could use through cell phones. And basically, he used this mind control program to program Colin Firth to go into that church. And as the message was going on, Colin Firth realized that he didn't like the message, so he got up to walk out of the church. And then Samuel L. Jackson pretty much turned on his little brainwash machine that's connected to the cell phones. And this brainwash machine makes anyone become uber violent. They start to fight. They can't control themselves. And basically, he makes Colin Firth get up and kill this whole church full of Christians, and they would be characterized by today's secular liberal community as extremist Christians just because they do not agree with homosexuality or with abortion. And basically, he made Colin Firth get up and kill this whole room full of Christians. It begins with this one woman who basically follows after Colin Firth and asks him, why is he leaving? He can't deal with the message that's being preached. And basically, she condemns Colin Firth to hell. She said, you are going to burn in hell because, you can't take the sound doctrine of the gospel. Colin turns around, he points a gun directly at her head, and he shoots her point blank range in the head, and blood flies everywhere. And from that point on, pandemonium hits the church, and Colin Firth single-handedly kills pretty much a whole church full of at least 100 extras in this movie that are supposed to be Christian extremists. And this is the most violent part of the whole movie. This scene lasts a good 6 or 7, if not 8 minutes, with some of the most horrific violence you'd ever want to see. He stabs one person straight in the eye, blood spattering everywhere. He's punching, kicking, stabbing, picking up pieces of wood, disemboweling people, almost decapitating them. And all these people, mind you, are supposed to be believers, but they're considered extremist believers, and they're considered a hate group because they preach against homosexuality and abortion and biblical topics such as that today. And this whole big ugly scene of violence ends with him planting an axe in this one parishioner's head. Blood's going everywhere. He throws the minister out the window of the church. And I was so outraged and so disgusted by this, I truly did want to get up and leave the movie, but I had paid my money and I did want to see how the movie ended, because it was, I mean, as I said, it was a fairly good script. It was a gripping, very entertaining movie, and all the violence up to that point, it was more comedic violence. It was not really graphic. You didn't see a lot of blood. It was edited perfectly. And until we got to this point where the director is saying, okay, yes, it's okay to kill these people because they are extremists and they consider them to be a hate group. And as a believer, I find that very outrageous and disturbing. And I sent a tweet to 20th Century Fox that produced this movie, that they're the studio that distributes this movie. Pardon me. And I've tried to find the director's Twitter, but I'm thus far I've not been able to find a Twitter account for the man who directed this movie. And what's even more disturbing is he basically put a little snippet of this scene on the Twitter account for the movie to promote the movie, but you don't see all the horrific violence. All you see is him punching, the minister, throwing him out of the church window. But from the from this preview, from this little clip, you don't see the whole scene in its entirety and in context. It is definitely Christian persecution. And as I tweeted to the studio, if there is no way in hell that if this director had staged a scene like that where Colin Firth's character came into a gay bar and killed a room full of homosexuals, or into a black establishment and he killed a room full of blacks or Jews or any other group, there is no way that scene would have made it into the movie. It would have ended up on the cutting floor. And if by some strange happenstance that it did, there would be such an outcry against this movie that it would have been taken out of theaters like that. There is no way. But today you can basically stage a scene of horrific violence against Christians who are seen as extremists, and even as they say, as they characterize these people in the group, in the movie, as a hate group. And when they go to the church, he's just preaching against homosexuality, calls it sodomy. He's preaching against abortion. All things that the Bible does condemn clearly in Scripture. And I do believe that Christians need to be aware of this, first of all, so they will not spend their money on this movie. And we all need to be aware that as Bible-believing Christians, we have been stereotyped as a hate group. There is actually President Obama actually has Homeland Security agents watching certain churches and certain groups, and more as we get further into the last days, and as Christian persecution comes to America, definitely first through Hollywood, because Hollywood promotes the homosexual agenda to support gay marriage and to support the full acceptance of the practice of homosexuality in this land. So they definitely have a problem with anybody who teaches biblical Christianity and a traditional biblical point of view that the practice of homosexuality is perverted and a sinful practice, and that there is no such thing as a gay marriage that would be sanctified by God according to Scripture. They have a problem with that. So they see any Bible-believing Christian that preaches or promotes that idea as hate speech, and they see those Christians as a hate group. And as I said, even President Obama has Homeland Security watching certain church groups, and they are considered domestic terrorist and extremist groups, and they're on the terrorist watch list. Believe that or not, it's time for Christians to wake up, and it's time for them to understand that persecution is coming to America. Just because we don't have beheadings in America by ISIS doesn't mean that the persecution is not already here. It is already here. Hollywood is going to be one of our biggest enemies. Liberal Democrats that do not support the gospel are again going to be some of our biggest enemies, and we have to realize that. And I want you as believers, those who do still go see movies, I want you to know about the content in this film, because there's nowhere you're going to see that in the previews and the trailers for this movie. You will not see it until you get to the theater and you've spent your money and you've wasted your money giving it to people that are trying to lampoon our faith, and they're trying to politically keep us down. So I want to let you know that, and I'm going to do a follow-up with the Twitter account address of 20th Century Fox and the director of the movie Kingsman, Secret Service. Is doing great at the box office, but you need, as a believer, you need to stay away from this movie and don't spend your money on something that trashes the gospel, that trashes our faith, and trashes our scriptures. Thank you for your time. This is David Gunn. Please tune in again to Spiritual Warfare.